Right, hello everybody. Let's see. Looks good. This is Grandmaster Steven Zierk, and I'll be teaching the chess class for rookies and then the chess class for knights now. Let's see, is everything working well? Audio, video look good. Yeah, so for today, I wanted to cover a few past games that I think are very instructive. These first couple games cover one of my favorite tactical motifs. In this game by Lasker, or sort of starting at the key position, it's probably the most famous example of this tactic, this attacking maneuver. And we're also going to cover a subsequent one. So let's see, I'll wait a couple more minutes, or wait a minute until there's a few more people. Yeah, let's see. So today, I'm not going to be playing the people right now, but the next stream will be on Tuesday. All right, there we go. Looks like we've got a good audience now. Thanks, Steve. Great name. Yeah, so in this position, again, this is a famous game by Lasker. And looking at this position, what do we think? Where do we think White wants to play? What generally speaking, might White want to do in this position? And why? So any ideas? So in this position, White really wants to play on the king side. And it basically comes down to two reasons. Right. Ivan's got it. You want to play on the king side, especially a king side attack. Right? These bishops are just clamoring to attack on the king side, right? They're lined up on the perfect diagonals. Not only that, but Black's bishops are nowhere near the king side. So White's got this preponderance of force aimed towards Black's king. The knight and queen are also ready to jump in. And again, Black's queen is also just the lack of black pieces, not only near the king side, but able to get to the king side. Right? This queen has no way in. This bishop has no way in. This black pawn center is nice, but it also kind of isolates Black's pieces away from their own king. So in this position, you are correct. Knight h5 is the move. Black has ideas of d4 for sure. This bishop and queen lineup can be strong. For the moment, though, White is striking first. When we play knight h5, we're creating an immediate threat of demolishing Black's pawn structure with a capture on f6. And in the game, to cover this, Black ended up taking White's knight. Now, maybe a couple of you might have seen this before. This is pretty famous. Does anyone know what the attacking idea is for White here? Right? We don't know whether it's good yet, but what should White consider here in order to unleash an attack on Black? All right, so there's the move that might immediately jump to mind, and it's pretty logical, right? Recapture the knight. And you might say, well, I've got a very strong attack. And it does look it. It's not the least reasonable move in the world, but when you take here, it's a bit too slow. Black plays f5, which kills this bishop. And you might play rook f3 next. Again, a logical move to add fuel to the fire. But now Black has this nice move, queen e8. And suddenly, you're either trading queens, or if you play queen h3, you're badly gimping your own attack. So queen takes h5, f5 is a nice defense from black. Because, like I said, not only does it block the bishop, but now the queen is jumping to the defense with tempo, because the queen trade would completely kill the attack. So queen takes h5 is logical, but okay, it's nothing special, at least at first glance. Yeah, a couple of you mentioned it. The key here is what, actually, it's not just like Lasker's double bishop sack, it is Lasker's double bishop sack. Bishop takes h7. And you don't, I mean, I'm not saying just play this move. I'm not saying it's automatically good. In another similar position, it might be bad. But this is absolutely an idea to consider. Just demolishing black's kingside. Queen takes h5 comes with check now, forcing king g8. And now, so let me ask you this. So, the fact that it's called Lasker's double bishop sack probably gives away the next move. Right. But let me ask you this. Let's say white goes rook f3. Let's say white goes rook f3 now and tries to lift the rook and just do a single bishop sack. Any idea? What can black do here? How does black try and defend against this? And this is a good defensive setup to know, because I've actually seen several games where white went for this kind of an attack, and if black responds correctly, he actually has a nice way to escape. All right, yeah, a couple people got it. Yeah, so this is key. When you're just attacking with the queen and rook like this, or just attacking on the h-file, f6 is often a nice defense. And this is part of why this f6 defense, right, it ruins any h-file checkmates, right? Queen h7, queen h8 will never checkmate. And this f6 defense is actually part of why so many kingside attacks involve maybe a knight on g5 or a light squared bishop that can jump to g6, or even a pawn on g6 could be very strong. Something that deals with this f7 route. Because in this case, you have to be precise, right? It's promising for an attack, but you have to execute carefully. And here, white doesn't have much, right? So rook f3 is a little too slow, right? You have to check your opponent's defenses as well. But the key idea is bishop takes g7. King takes g7. So we've blown the king wide open, but we are down 2 bishops. So we need to be fast and we need to be careful. How do we make this attack work here? Yeah, and that other line, after f6, black is basically a piece up for very limited compensation. So, yeah, this is very important, right? To checkmate, we're not going to checkmate with just the queen, so we want to bring the rook in the game. I see some people saying rook f3 to bring the rook in, and I see some people saying queen g4 first. So let's ask this. Let's say we go into the attack, right? Let's say we go rook f3. What might black do? All right, yeah, good call. Rook f3. Black's king being on the g-file means that black can actually basically make an escape with rook g8. Right, we're threatening rook g3, king f6, queen g5 mate, but black makes this f8 route. And after check, king f8, white does get a rook. So you get a lot of material back. You have a rook and 2 pawns. But after king d7, black has a powerful bishop pair, and of course this king is surrounded by friendly pieces and not getting checkmated anytime soon. So this is actually another, I would say, thematic defense that's worth knowing. Right, when the king is stuck on the open king side, one way or another, the king wants to get out of the king side. The king wants to get over here. Maybe it can try through f6, maybe it can try with the f6 lines I mentioned earlier. In this case, it runs through f8. And we can get a rook, but if we want, we should look for something better. And the key here, and this is a nice in-between move, we throw in queen g4. Right, so black can't go king f6. This is important. King f6, he gets checkmated. And so black has to go to the h-file. All right, this is a good sign. King's not running to the f-file anytime soon now. And now white goes rook f3. So what is the only move for black here? What does black have to do to avoid checkmate? And as a little bonus, can you read ahead to the next few moves? Try and read ahead at a few moves in the future and give an evaluation of the position. Well, so rook h3 is coming. Bishop h4 stalls, but it doesn't stop the mate, right? That's just a useless intermezzo. Right, yep, a few people got it. e5. Only way for black to stop the checkmate. I mean, bishop g5, queen takes, again, just stalls a move. But e5. So now rook checks. Queen h6. Yeah, so black has to give up the queen. But at the moment, black does have, right? Even if we win the queen, black does have a rook and two bishops for a queen and two pawns. It's not terrible. This is why you have to keep calculating. As a general rule, when you're reading out a continuation like this, you want to try and read out until everything is resolved, until it's not always possible, but when possible, when you're reading out a combination like this, until the position is stable and you can say, okay, well, this is the material balance. This is how I evaluate the position. So queen f5, king g7. What's the follow-up to that? Right, queen f5, you have to see black keeps defending the queen. How would white continue from there? Right, so I see some people touching on it. You can throw in queen f5 if you want. It actually doesn't change anything. Right, now you want to take the queen. Queen e5, queen f6. It's inadvisable. But now white has takes, takes, and whether or not you play queen f5, now you play queen d7. And you've got this fork of the bishops, which means that white wins one of these pieces back. Yeah, in the game, white didn't bother with queen f5. White took in queen d7. White won the b7 bishop. And this is what I mean. Now the position has stabilized and in favor of white, right? We can say that white has queen and two pawns for rook and bishop. Even a queen against rook and bishop without the pawns is often a winning advantage. And besides white's two extra pawns, black has more pawns hanging, black's king is unsafe. At this point, white has a comfortably winning advantage. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, calculating this is tough. But you want to the general point is you want to calculate as best you can. Like, that's the ideal. But at this point, you don't need to calculate anymore here. That's also what I'm saying. There's this cutoff. When you get to a position like this, you can say, okay, I don't need to read ahead more moves here. White's clearly winning. Just thinks the material advantage, even before you take the monster queen and unsafe king into account. Like, this is where you cut off your calculation. Yeah, this is a very nice combination by Lasker. And sure enough, I mean, takes here, and white won pretty comfortably from here. So again, this is only one of many attacking ideas. But this is a good pattern to know. And again, it doesn't automatically mean it's good, but the first step in playing a combination like this is knowing that this is an idea. So now we're going to see this idea in action. Right, it's an extreme Greek gift. You could almost call it a double Greek gift with two bishops. And of course, this combination itself is quite advanced, but the general idea is more what I carry on. Yeah, we did just see it in action. We're going to see it in action again. Yeah, this next game, another famous game, and one if you haven't seen before, it's definitely worth remembering. So this is a game between Nimzowitsch and Tarrasch. But a couple decades after the last one, actually. And jumping through this game, so they play an opening setup that was pretty standard at the time. If these face-off of pawns, it's a pretty logical development. But especially back then, this game was in 1914. It was very typical. They would just develop their pieces to pretty logical squares, but not always in the best way. We've definitely made some opening progress. And we're going to see actually a couple things that could be improved that I think are pretty instructive. So in this position, white plays bishop d3. And again, not a reasonable developing move. But one downside is when this bishop is developed like this. When this bishop is developed like this, black can take. Black can settle this tension in the center and force white to take here. And you'll actually see a lot of games like this where one side loses a tempo like this, because this bishop's moved twice to get from f1 to c4. Yeah, it's a handy tempo. And so if black plays a6 here, if you see this position, this move with bishop d3 is not played so much now for this reason. Like in this position nowadays, the move that jumps to mind for me here is knight c3. Or to avoid losing this tempo in the future, you can take on d5. And actually, there are some other games from that time where knight c3 was played. But just to show you, after bishop d3, if black takes and plays a6, look at this position. And now, if we go into another line, this line with knight f6, c4, takes. And this is a line of the QGA that is popular nowadays. This is actually something I play myself, as both white and black. e3, e6, takes, c5, castles a6. So this is a very popular opening line nowadays. This position's played all the time. Compare this position to this position where black's just played a6. And what do you see? Right? Compare and contrasting these. Right, tempo difference. Right? In this line, the bishop went straight from f1 to c4. And white's gotten a free move to castle. In this line, after bishop d3, takes, and a6, white's made 6 moves in both cases, but this time, this move has just kind of disappeared, right? White's played bishop d3, then bishop takes c4. So that's the downside to this setup. In the game, black doesn't take on c4. Black makes perfectly reasonable development, but this is kind of what I'm talking about, especially back then. They just kind of, I mean, they developed their pieces and controlled the center well, which is logical, but they didn't always do it in the ideal way. Yeah, the QGA is a good way to do it. The more general thing I would say is, if you're going to do a setup like this, at some point, for example, you might take on d5 and play bishop b5 check. Generally speaking, playing e3 like this, passively before black has taken, right, is not the strongest. I mean, I don't want to act like it's a disaster. You know, it's not like white's in really bad shape or anything here, but it's a more useful concept to be aware of. This idea of losing tempi this way or gaining tempi. Because back then again, they just kind of developed their pieces. They didn't really think about exact move orders and such. Yeah, taking on d5 and bishop b5, for example, is another thing you could do to avoid this little problem. Funnily enough, actually after white castles, black does the same thing. So ironically, they both kind of offer this tempi to each other. And if I were playing, I would say that in this position, black should actually just avoid this by, you can even play a6 when you're up a tempo, or just take and then develop. Right, one way or another. Like this is another QGA position where black's just gotten a free move, right? Because this bishop's moved twice. So again, it's a pretty small thing, but it's a good thing to be aware of, right? You don't want to move your pieces twice in the opening, as a general rule. If you can make your opponent do it, well, that's also nice. So black develops, though, and both sides complete their development. And we end up seeing pretty symmetrical structures. So why a6? Oh, so why a6 back? Well, so back in these positions, a6, very often, it's another way to gain tempi. Black will often play b5 and bishop b7. That's the basic idea of a6 is to control b5, which has several uses. And fianchettoing this bishop is the most obvious one. Yeah, so it's to get this bishop out with tempo very often. In this case, right here, a6 isn't so useful. Because right here if you take on c4, white will probably take back with the pawn, and this b5 doesn't come into play. So instead of going for that a6, b5, black just plays b6. Yeah, and anti-fraud, that's absolutely an idea. Very often in these positions, you want to play e4, or black might want to play e5 at the right time. Because, I mean, here black probably won't take on e4, but let's say black does. Just saying if black takes here. Now white has a little more space. He's claimed some space in the center. His bishop's a little better. Generally speaking, if you can pull off e4 like this well, that is definitely a good idea. And how you prepare it exactly varies from position to position. Incidentally, let's say as a little puzzle, if white goes e4, at the moment it's defended twice and attacked twice. So at the moment e4 is safe. Can we see a way to uncover another attacker on e4 for black? Why can't white play this here? How does black add more pressure to e4 with tempo? Right, knight b4. Yep. People got it. So this, right, double purpose move. It uncovers the bishop. Suddenly we've got 3-2 on the e4 pawn. And not only that, but we're targeting this bishop at the same time. And now white's got some problems. So useful double purpose move. So it does allow e5. This does fork the pieces, but we're taking d3. Yeah. Right, and you do want to check this, but the complications work out for black because this bishop is hanging too. What about bishop b1? So here bishop b1 is probably the best move. But now, for instance, the simplest way, black can take e4. Let's see what I take with. I would be tempted to take with the knight. Because now after takes, white has no knight g5 thanks to my queen. But white needs to play bishop b1. But the point is, this is good for black. Because now black rules e4, not white. I mean, worst case, even if white does get this pawn back, and that's far easier said than done, that's nothing but getting material equality. So e4 is something white wants to do. It's just that concretely, this knight b4 double threat makes it impossible. So white goes rook c1. This move, it might be hard to see the value of it at first, but there's a couple ideas behind it. First of all, this bishop will likely go to b1, right, to deal with knight b4 threats, maybe to set up a battery on h7, and then it won't be blocking the rook. Secondly, at some point these pawns will trade, and then this rook can be very useful in the c-file. So right now there's no open files, so there's no dream squares for rooks. But yes, exactly, yeah, Dr. Chainsaw. These files, the C, D, and E files, right? Because these are the pawns that are getting traded. These are the ones that tend to open at some point. You know, depending on whether white plays E4, whether these pawns capture or these pawns capture. The rooks generally belong on these files in these positions. Is A3 instead of rook C1 an option? It's a useful move. It does feel a little slow to me, but it's definitely a useful move, preventing knight b4 and potentially setting up e4 in the future. But that is, stopping knight b4 definitely has value. Instinctively, I'd rather bring pieces out, though. So rook c1. And again, rook e1 I would also consider reasonable. So rook c1, queen e7. And now one minor thing here. The setups here for white and black are almost completely symmetrical. Right? Bishops are the same, these knights are the same, the pawn structure is the exact same. The one difference is these knights. So let me ask this. Generally speaking, the knight on c6 or c3 is more active, right? This knight looks a little passive. So let's try and understand, why did white put the knight on d2? What is this knight being here instead of here? How does it help white? Right, it opens up this bishop. Or more specifically, it doesn't block the bishop. We kind of saw that here. When white tried e4, we immediately went knight b4 to open this bishop. Yeah, so this knight, it leaves this bishop open. And another thing I really like about it is that with this bishop being here, so let's actually show after rook c1, queen e7, since this bishop is open, it also means white has this move, knight e5. All right, if this knight were here, e5 would be hanging because the bishop would be blocked. But white can use this really valuable e5 square. And not only that, but this knight is ideally situated to head to f3 at some point and reinforce the e5 square. I mean, it's very valuable. A rook's worth a rook. I mean, the exchange is a lot of material. I wouldn't say e5 is that good, but it's very nice. It's a square white should definitely use. Yeah, so this, I would say, would be a logical way for white to use these knights. In the game, though, white starts to go a little wrong. A counterattack with knight b4. So after knight b4, this is kind of the value of rook c1. The bishop jumps back to b1. It might feel like it's a little passive here, but it's actually the opposite. The bishop being such a long-range piece means this bishop can do a lot of work from all the way back here. And at some point, this a3 idea that was mentioned will kick the knight back. So white's okay with this now. White's okay with putting the bishop back here. Right? The bishop reaches all the way across the board. It does the same things basically on b1 that it was doing on d3. And you can already kind of see, right, the potential for the bishop attacks on both sides if the position opens up. In the game, though, instead of this knight e5, which is what I would like, white takes on d5. And Nimzowitsch had an idea here, which has some merit. So his idea was after takes, black takes with the pawn. And now, so e5 is actually covered by the queen now. e5 is no longer safe. But Nimzowicz's idea was this, to play knight h4. And the thinking is, he wants to play knight f5, quite possibly trade for this bishop, which will leave white with very nice dark square control. And f5 is not easy to cover. So Tarrasch actually goes g6. And this is probably what Nimzowitsch wanted. It feels a little weakening, and it is. His thinking is, okay, well, this diagonal is somewhat weakened. So he's induced this diagonal weakness. But at the same time, with knight h4 and c takes d5, maybe we can ask, what has black gained in the last couple moves? Like, why is this and this not ideal? He's gained a terrible bishop on b7. For the moment. There are cases where this capture is good. Quite a few of them. And actually exactly when to do it is a very tricky question in chess. So don't think it's bad as a rule because of this example. The big thing though, he is offsiding. That's how I would put it, right? Knight on the rim is dim. Now that knight f5 is taken away, you've induced this weakness, but the knight is very silly now. Yeah, bishop takes h2 is already a concern in some lines, and actually white decides to solve the problem immediately with knight f3. So white's basically just spent 2 moves going back and forth. And the other thing, and this is more minor, but the other thing is, when doing this trade, this e5 square I mentioned was so nice for a white knight. Right, now it's covered. Now black has 3 defenders, and white is not going to use it for a long time, if ever. So white, to set up this weakened diagonal, has kind of given black some control. And black goes rook d8. Well, the other problem is now, right, I mentioned this knight wants to come to e5 and this knight to f3. But now this knight can't come to e5, and this knight's just kind of staring at its buddy in the way here. So it's kind of tough for white to use these pieces. So Nimzowitsch takes, and black takes. Right, so he's opened up this bishop. And he's created this weakness I mentioned, but at the same time, thanks to these pawns on the 4th rank, this pair of pawns, these are actually called hanging pawns, a very common pawn structure. They can be a little weak, but they give black so much room. Right, you can see black has a serious space advantage here, and a bit of a development advantage too, right? White's queen is still on the 1st rank. So Nimzowitsch had a lot of phenomenal positional ideas. His book, My System, it's a great work on them. But one thing that got him in trouble sometimes against other top players was a lack of respect for time, I would say. Like he's created this weakness, but he's gone a little slowly, and he's given black a lot of room. And as we're going to see, it hasn't happened yet, but given black a lot of active play. You could do rook e1, knight f1. That's the problem. That's about as good as you can get for this knight. Another handy trick to keep in mind is having a pawn 3 squares in front of a knight like this, right? D2 to D5. It's actually really bad for the knight. Right? This pawn is taking away the 2 most active squares this knight could go to. So that in particular, then right F3 is out of the question. It's taken by the other knight. B3 is out of the question. This knight has nowhere active to go. Suddenly, white kind of wishes it were here, like black's. Okay, rook e1, knight f1 is about as good as I can see. But then even black can even use this e4 square, as we're going to see in the game. In the game instead, white goes for bishop b5. A3 is not a bad idea here either. Knight b4 is a concern. At some point, b4 would be nice. I mean, black's going to have some things to say, right? Black has a lot to say right now about you playing b4. But if you can play it to target these pawns, by all means. White goes bishop b5. White has the space disadvantage. So there's some logic behind trading pieces. But we're going to see why. This is actually very dangerous. So Tarrasch goes knight e4. And actually, in my last play, the people, I kind of talked about this some too. With these active center pawns, black has many more squares. If white had space, if white's queen were active, right? If white's queen could get on this diagonal, it would just be checkmate. Queen h8 or queen g7. But right now, white just doesn't have room. There's no way to do it. Actually, the only way white could do that, is by bishop a1 and bringing the queen to b2. But as you might imagine, that's a little slow. So in the game, white trades on c6 and plays queen c2. And so perhaps here, Nimzowitsch had the idea of trading on e4 and then playing queen c3, right? And trying to use this diagonal. You know, the thing he put so much work into weakening. That black's got the initiative. We'll see if black has the initiative, and black strikes first. So black takes on d2. White takes back with the knight. Perhaps white should have taken with the queen to keep more defense around the kingside. But maybe can someone see here? How does black create some weakness around white's king here? How does black, shall we say, unleash some pressure? Right, d4. Right, we've got this unopposed light square bishop. We've got it on the biggest diagonal on the board, aimed right at white's king. Let's use it. So black plays d4. And first of all, we have this threat of bishop takes f3, just ripping apart white's king's defenses. And it's honestly not easy to deal with. You know, white has perhaps a counter idea of knight takes d4. But as we're going to see, we're going to kind of get into it later. Black has some big threats against white's king in response to that. Yeah, anytime you have these pawns, especially a bishop like this, like I said, a bishop like this, anytime you have it, d4 should be in your repertoire, right? It's not always good, but it's something white always has to worry about. You know, even if white is preventing d4, then white has to basically be on the defensive. White has to make concessions to be ready for it. And when white plays knight takes d2, what do you guys think? Yeah, I think a couple of you are already guessing where this is heading, based on the Lasker game. What do you think the next step is here? All right, we've got this beautiful bishop pair on great diagonals. We've got a white king that has far too little defense. How do we use these bishops? So bishop takes h2. These sacks on the king side are the idea. But yeah, we do want to prepare it a bit the same way. Right, d4. So this is a very dangerous threat. But we do need this bishop as well. So white takes on d4. Right, if he doesn't take on d4, it's honestly tough to come up with a good move for white's kingside. Let's see. So e4 is an idea. Yeah, e4 would be a good defensive try. I'm even thinking about f5 at the right time to try and tear this pawn open, to tear open this defense. e4 is a good idea, though. E4 is a good principled defensive try. And honestly, that's what white should have played. If white saw what was coming, that's the direction I would say white should go. Let's see, f5, so f3 here. Now this is weak, though. Now queen h4 looks very strong. g3, I can look at sacking the bishop. Oh yeah, f3 immediately, right? Again, white would like to do it to cover this, but then e3. But I like e4 better than what was, it's definitely a better defensive try than what was played in the game, right? We've got this unopposed monster-like squared bishop, so let's try and set up a defense. This is good defense. In the game, though, white made things a little easier. White took on d4. All right, now for those of you who are here at the beginning, what's the combination? How are we attacking this king side? All right, bishop h2 to start things off. Very nice. White takes. Sometimes declining is a thing, but after king h1, queen h4, the attack's even stronger. So queen h4. All right. King g1. Bishop takes g2. Very nice. So now if white takes, if white decides to accept both bishops, a couple of you already mentioning the attacking style, it's actually very similar to the last game. Exact same kind of rook lift. First we do queen g4. We force the king all the way to this terrible h-file. And now after rook d5. All right, but now this, yeah, it's a lot easier, right, when you've seen the idea already. But that's a big part of chess, right? You have these attacking ideas. Like some of you have mentioned the Greek gift, where you sack a bishop and play knight g4 check. That's another common attacking motif. This is also one that's good to know. This double bishop sack, right? You completely devastate the king's shield. So rook d5, but hang on. In this position, we do have to be a little careful. White has one defense. One defense against mate. Can anyone see it? How does white stop, at least checkmate? Right, I mean, there's a couple stalling moves, like queen g6, but the only move that deals with the mate threat is queen takes c5. So yeah, this is a nice defensive resource. This is some clever defense from white. Here, though, rook h5 is not mate. We can win white's queen, but maybe now, what's the best move order? What's the best way to win the most material here? And again, ironically, it's a lot like the Lasker game again. Right, it loses the queen, but keep in mind, rook, bishop, and knight for queen is not such a bad deal. So let's see if we can't get a little more. And a couple of you are touching on it. Right. There's a couple ways, but this knight is hanging. And no surprise, when there's a wide open king, when a queen against a wide open king, a lot of time there's some useful checks. Yeah, there's a couple ways to win it, but the gist of it is, we're not just winning the queen, we're winning the knight. We check with the queen, we snap off white's queen, and next we get white's knight with a winning advantage, right? Queen for rook and bishop, plus white's unsafe king, adds up to a very big advantage for black. And this just illustrates another rule that the tactics just tend to work out for the person with the better position, for the person with fewer weaknesses. All right, this king being wide open and this knight being loose cause serious problems. Is there merit to playing rook d8? Rook d8 doesn't feel like it adds that much. That's the problem, because it's not generating any new threats, right? If you do rook takes, white does rook takes, and you can't bring the other rook in. So it feels a little slow. Yeah, so this queen f4 check is nice, and black would win. Yeah, knight d2 definitely has not worked out for white this game. I kind of mentioned this knight would have been good to go to f3 and e5, as it was in the game, but white did not play around that correctly. White absolutely did not make use of that in the game. So when black takes on g2, he's threatening queen h1 checkmate. So king takes g2, we covered. White has one other defensive idea here, actually, that we kind of talked about before, too. How else can white stop checkmate here? Right, f3. And this is a common defensive idea. In the Lasker game, we looked at f6 from black for similar reasons. And the idea is just to give the king this square. So queen h1, king f2. I mean, even just taking on f1 is good for black, but it's not the most black can get. So instead of taking immediately, first of all, if black tries to be too clever, what if black goes queen g3 here, trying to mate this way? How does white cover this? All right, knight e4. And this is a tragedy. Queen's hanging, and suddenly we're uncorking white's queen. Yeah, uncorks a double threat, and suddenly black's completely busted because he's losing the bishop. So instead of that, yeah, and good call, chess thinker, and instead of taking, black just reinforces with rook e8. Planning to add the rook into the attack. So now rook e2 is a huge threat, right? Covering the king's escape, defending the bishop, and setting up queen h1 checkmate next. So white plays knight e4 in order to block the rook. And a very logical move. Now black goes for check and takes. So black decides to take the rook. And now why is this better here? Why can't white take back? Right. The knight's actually, funnily enough, this is the one time the knight was doing something useful on d2. Queen h2 skewers the queen. And white can resign. So this rook is overloaded. It needs to guard the queen, so it can't take the bishop. What about knight g3 instead? It's an idea. It would be good to win the bishop, but now we see the power of rook e8. Right? The rook's cutting off the king's escape, and queen g2 is checkmate. I mean, the truth is, I wish I could suggest something good for white, but there's nothing here. So white actually goes for what I'd say is as good a try as any. White goes for d5. And practically speaking, objectively, black's gotten the extra material and white's facing a vicious attack. So white decides to go for counterplay on this diagonal, and with queen c3 as an idea. And if you're facing an attack like this, right, rather than just kind of roll over and get a hopeless position, I'd say if that's the only other choice, then you should definitely go for something like this. Create some threats. You can play knight f6. The problem is, let's say black just goes to h8. If you take, black checks and takes on e8 with check, and you're just facing a huge attack. Like, the king is actually going to get mated. You just can't afford to take this knight out of the defense. So white goes d5. Here there's several good continuations for black. Yeah, queen g2 and f5 is also good. Right, queen checks. King goes up. f5 pins the knight. Yeah, this is absolutely a good continuation. You do have to watch out for queen c3. So the game's not over yet. We're actually going to see this exact position come up. So black plays f5 first. Yeah, Trebejo. There's the kind of the same thing here. If white checks and takes the rook, white gets back the exchange, but after check and takes with check, this king is just not long for the world. You know, something like king f4, g5. And as a general rule, if your king's being forced to a square like this, it's going to get mated. Right, like this. So black could take and rook g8. So white can win back the exchange, but getting rid of this knight, it just ends like this. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of winning continuations. I'm not going to go through all of them in depth. Suffice to say, black's attack is monstrously strong. So black goes f5. White goes queen c3. All right, creating some counter threats. So now black has to be fast. There's no time to take the knight. This threat's actually pretty serious. But Tarrasch, as we're going to see, came up with a nice finish. Queen g2 check. If king e1, queen e2 is mate. So white has to go king e3. Rook takes e4. F takes. And here, it's a little puzzle. What is the fastest checkmate? Black to play and mate in 3. And a good general rule for looking for mates, look at the most forcing moves you have. So the most forcing checks that really restrict white's options. f4 is winning. It's actually what was played in the game. But after king takes, check, the king actually does some running. There is a faster way. Yeah, right, when there's a king like this, as might be expected, there are many ways for black to win. But there's a forcing checkmate that leaves white no options. Yeah, so I think you're touching on it, Myro. So queen g3. There we go. A couple people have it. Yeah, queen g3 check. Covers these escapes. Only move is king d2. Queen f2 check covers this escape. Only move is king d1 and queen e2 checkmate. So that was actually the fastest and most forcing checkmate. But there are other winning moves too, and it's speculated that Tarrasch did this one on purpose because it's a fancier checkmate. Even though it takes longer to mate. Like I said, when your opponent has this much material, a king that walks up here, it does not have a bright future. Queen h2, king e6, check, king d7, and one last move. Black to play and mate. Yeah, so we've chased the white king all the way to d7. Right, this king's gotten some serious exercise. All right, these are the squares we need to cover. And there it is. Bishop b5 checkmate. Like I said, it's speculated he did this checkmate on purpose for style points. Which I don't generally recommend. You definitely want to be careful, but sure enough, it is mate. And it's no surprise, right? You have a king on d7 with no defenses. Yeah. Everything's covered. That is true. I'm sure it does not help. This game's fame, I'm sure, is not hurt by the fact that he went for this checkmate. Incidentally, another chess term you guys might like to know. This is called a perfect mate, because every square black needs to cover for checkmate is defended exactly once. So that's an aesthetic aspect of this checkmate as well. Hi Sky, so I'm not playing the people today, but if you come by Tuesday at 3:30 Central, then you can absolutely play me. Yeah. So that's the game, right? Tarrasch taking a page out of Lasker's book, and winning in style. So I hope that was an interesting game, guys. Yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts, comments on it. I'm going to pause for a couple minutes, and then I will come back for the Knights class. Yeah, thank you all for watching.